recommendations that Excel did not adopt. That's the offensive part. The defensive part is how we're going to be defending against some of the parties like the consumers, the industrial consumers, the commercial consumers, and the residential consumers through the UCA who want the budget pared down as always. And what they generally argue is that a portion of the budget, 20% of the budget, is allocated to like flexible spending as opposed to a budget, and removed from the budget. So play a little defense means that would do some cross-examination to try and make the point that the budget is needed to meet the plan goals. And for the most part, Excel hasn't actually needed to tap that budget to its full extent in any one year. I realize this is a lot of information at once, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and to clarify too, so that means basically when we went through the settlement agreement, which we all worked on and being the group, spent a lot of time in our action groups, what we wanted to propose, that got proposed. There's a settlement agreement. That deadline was the 29th. We had it complete with everything in it that we were able to get from Excel. But when they decided to pull out and say, nope, we're going to litigation, then what happened is everything that was presented in the rebuttal and testimony was included going forward, but we lost everything that was in the difference that was left over in the settlement agreement. So we're going to litigation, try to get those items back, get those modifications or new rebates back. But then the defensive piece as well is if we don't go, the other groups that you're mentioning, Mark, like the Consumer Council and them, they're going to put together and they're going to say, we shouldn't have this budget. We shouldn't be doing very much. And then if we don't go in and present the other side, which is, this is why we should be doing these things, we're going to miss out on having the opportunity to keep them from going in a direction that makes it worse for our businesses. Is that accurate?
That is really accurate, Patricia. And the key point is that when we reach a settlement, we don't just reach it with Excel. We also reach it with these big consumer groups. And so there have been times in the past where we've had to litigate against the UCA, for example, or where one of those parties hasn't joined the settlement. But it's usually been not a problem because the Excel's leading a settlement and there's a lot of parties and there's good coverage from groups like staff of the commission. But in the case where there's not a settlement, it's much more of a free-for-all situation. And so for that reason, there's defensive considerations as well as offensive to make sure we can keep the program as strong as it has been.
So, and then do you guys have any questions? I thought that clarification, but it took me a while to understand all that. And so just want to open up for questions. And then the other piece that we have is we put together what we call always our table of wins, partial wins and losses. And so we've summarized this and includes like of the overall 31 recommendations and proposals that EBC put in, it was about 25 of them that were either accepted or partially accepted, which is a really high number. So we don't want to lose those. And so we have the table of wins document and we can share it that explains that. But I'm wondering if you could give us a brief description and I can share it of what's in the chart so they can see what is still included in the plan and what's not. And I'm looking all over because I'm admitting people and sending them out the correct. So I apologize. The correct passwords.
So the table that everyone has a far right column that has in red font what Excel agreed to in rebuttal on each proposal.
Right.
And then highlighted on that same column are things that Excel had agreed to in the settlement, but not in rebuttal. And those are the things that we currently don't have. I want to emphasize that when we go into the hearing, what we're actually going to be pushing for are the proposals as Howard originally made them in his testimony, not necessarily the same exact thing as what was in the settlement agreement. And that's because settlement agreements are confidential, and so it's much harder for us to say to Excel in the hearing, hey, you were going to agree to this, but now you're not. You can't really go there in the litigation. As far as the individual rebates and products, I think that's a good point for me to drop off and let Howard talk if he's on the individual recommendations.
And I don't think Howard's on, is he?
I
can't see.
have called him, texted him, and he is not on, and he's not picking up his phone.
Okay, can you guys see the document that I'm sharing? Can you guys see the document I'm sharing?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, cool, great. Okay, I think there was a question. Did somebody have a question?
I have a question. Who do we have allies in this? Just out of curiosity, is there other people that would be fighting for the same thing that we are fighting for that would help our cause?
The answer is yes, but we do have allies like the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project and maybe Western Resource Advocates or some environmental groups like the Sierra Club, and then cities like Boulder and Denver. Lots of people who are familiar with the EDC and know and trust Howard as well. None of those are as good as Howard, and none of those people will sort of get really down in the nitty-gritty details, except for maybe the suite.
And
Oh, somebody please mute in the background, sorry.
So the short answer, answer is yes, and that
Okay.
will be working with those people.
Okay. And then going back to the do nothing thing, like I know that you said that's not an option, but I guess I'm confused if they agreed to a lot of this stuff up front. I know there's going to be other people fighting against what they had agreed to, but is it possible if you, and I'm not saying we would do nothing, but is it possible you did nothing that a lot of this stuff would still happen, or is it basically like we did nothing, none of this stuff would happen?
Well, so the part where we don't have a choice is everything having to do with our testimony and evidence. So that means that we have to show up to defend Howard, and
Like
Howard has to
defend
get up on
Howard,
himself.
yeah, and when you say Howard, he's talking about the settlement agreement
No.
pieces that are not in the current, won't show up because only the rebuttal testimony it would be
When I
looked at.
when I talk about Howard, I mean his testimony that he submitted. So he's a witness in the case, and he can be cross-examined, or the judge can ask him questions, and we have to participate in that because we filed testimony. The part that is our option, the part that is our option is whether or not to cross-examine Excel's witness, Mark Schoenheder, for 20 minutes, which is what I put down on the cross-examination matrix that we had to do earlier this week. And that, as I said, that cross-examination is not going to be super complicated, but then we try to make a record of points that we want to make in our closing statement. And then we draft a closing statement. And in that statement, we make all the arguments about what the commission should do in this decision. So the optional part of all those things is a relatively small part at this point, the cross-examination.
And
But when
the
you
purpose
say,
of the,
sorry,
I'm sorry, the purpose of the cross-examination would be to get a little more than what they've already given us, or what they already had originally agreed to, or just to, what would be the point, I guess, of cross-examining Mark?
Can I jump in real quick? Because I think there's a clarification that we are not getting what we originally agreed to because
Right.
they pulled out. So it's
Okay.
Howard had the why when we could say Howard has to, and we don't have a choice. It's because we won't get our items into the docket and we won't get them back if he doesn't testify, because it's the only way we can bring them forward now. And so we'll only get
Okay.
what's in the
Let me
chart.
change.
Yeah,
Let
but
me amend that, Patricia. So Howard filed a bunch of testimony, and that testimony largely is the same thing as what we asked in settlement.
there we go.
Excel got to file their rebuttal to us, in which they agreed to the things that are in red in your document, in that red column. So at the hearing, one thing we'll be doing is try to preserve those wins. A second thing we'll be doing is to try to lay the groundwork to ask for anything we didn't get that's in Howard's original testimony. I have to jump now. I apologize again, but I'm happy to answer more questions later on or by
Super
email.
helpful. Hey, Mark,
Patricia,
so
can you
everything
send out that document?
Yeah, absolutely. We will send
And
it out right after the meeting.
just be clear, the red is what we in theory have gotten, and the yellow is what's in question, right?
Yep, which
Okay,
we will not
thank
get
you.
if we don't go into the litigation next week. Yes. So I was kind of scrolling through so you can see and it says the rebuttal, like there was no changes to this item, like number 18 rebuttal. No, we didn't get it. Business lighting efficiency rebuttal, no changes. So they did accept that. And let me go up. That's why I wanted Howard to be able to walk through this, because he knows it inside and out. So here's an example. This was like for insulation and air sealing. So they accepted our increase in the rebates, which was awesome. So that rebuttal, that's why it says the same. So our cap of 500 and 400, so the 900 total. But what they did not, so it says this is kind of confusing because rebuttal, it says not mentioned. So it was odd because Excel said, they said, we accept, the insulation air sealing proposals, but so it accepted what was meant, was talked about specifically, but they didn't specifically say we accept the minimum threshold should be moved from R15 to R24. So that means that didn't make it, which was an important combo, to this. So we need Howard to bring that up so it can be confirmed that it will be included, or defend why it's critical that it needs to be included with, the cap. So that's.
I think we need Howard to go through this list, because that's not what I recall from our last conversation, Patricia, specifically at R24. They actually allowed us to go up to R24 to be the base minimum.
No, yes, that's true, but that was in our settlement agreement. But now we don't have it because they backed out of all the settlement agreements, and going forward, we're now going into going into the hearing. And in the hearing, and this was kind of explained in the very beginning of the call, so I'm sorry if you guys missed it in getting in, is that the original settlement that we had, when on the 29th, when Excel said that we're backing out and we're not going to settle and we're going to go into litigation, the items in this chart that are now included are only what Howard was able to talk about and Excel accepted in the rebuttal in the testimony and answer portion. So now our settlement agreement, so that's why we have all the items here on the left that were in our settlement agreement. And then, here's what initially Excel offered. Then this was our response, which is what you're talking about. What was settled to was on the right. which is the status of the PUC hearing set for the week. This is what they settled for in our agreement. But now we've lost half of it, right? So everything in yellow is what we have to go to litigate to get back. And so when Mark was talking about the testimony that Howard would be doing, he'd be addressing all these things in yellow to be able to get them in and see if we can get those back.
And Patricia, this is Sean, and I think Dietz and Davis just said that we can't go into this and said during our conversations you said you would agree to this. We have to work it in another way, which is the statement at the end. Is that correct?
Yes, the statement at the end is the most of what'll happen is the ALJ, so it's the judge who's making all these decisions. The PUC is not, which makes this a less predictive process, right? Because this judge is new, this judge not new, but is not I guess I want to say doesn't have the best reputation for going into the details and understanding it, and doesn't want to get into that. So what'll happen is all of that testimony will end up going to the PUC, but the commissioners don't really look at that. They really look at that statement of position at the end, which is critical. So that is why when Mark is saying we have to go, it's like, well, do we have to go? And we really do, because if we don't get that statement of position in, then we'll miss the opportunity to, get everything back in yellow.
Patricia,
Mhm.
this is Deb. I got off the phone with Howard. He is trying to log in right now. He just, he should be on shortly.
Okay, but yeah, Sean, that's a critical point that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so basically Excel, if Excel's defending anything here, they're defending their original proposals.
They're defending everything in red.
No, I'm talking Excel from their position.
Yes, their position is because what's in red is what was discussed in the rebuttal, so that is agreed to. What's not what they're defending is they're defending everything that was in rebuttal, which is in red, which means they're not really defending it. It's already done, right? So that's where they ended up, because that was what was discussed in the rebuttal. It's the yellow that we want to bring forward. So Excel isn't really able to defend it. They're just they're not involved in the litigation. It's the judge. So the judge is just looking at and saying, okay, everything in red is what EEBC and Excel is still agreed to. And then that's why the judge, she's going to listen to everybody's testimony, and they're trying to include what they lost as well. Remember, I'm not an expert at this. I'm learning as we're going to. Does that answer your question, Sean?
I hear what you're saying. I'm struggling to wrap my head around some of this, but that's just me.
That's okay.
I'm struggling with it too, for the record. So we had what we presented to Excel. This is what we want. And then they came back and said, this is what we'll give you. And then we said,
and that was in the settlement agreement.
and that was in the settlement agreement. Okay.
And
so all that stuff that's in the settlement agreement they've agreed to, which was it like 25 out of 31 things or something like that, where we had either a win or a partial win?
Yes. And
okay.
Right. Go ahead.
So of those 25 things, are you saying that those won't happen if we don't come to the table right now?
Okay.
And why would those 25 things go away, I guess, would be my question.
Right. And that's why I keep talking about the two parts of how all of our recommendations got accepted. And then what happens when Excel backed out is where the switch comes, because the 25, the summary of everything we put forward, the 31 is here in the right column. So it's all summarized. This is what was agreed to in the settlement agreement.
This is the 25 of 31 things, right?
Yeah, it's actually the full 31 things in the status on them, and the 25. Right. And so the referencing in yellow and red is what was, all of this was documented, what was accepted by Excel on the settlement agreement. But legally what happened is that when we got to the 29th, and if all the interveners had settled like we were headed towards on the 29th, we would have gotten the partials and wins, and the summary on the right would have been like, here's our final agreement. But what happened is legally, once they backed out, we go into litigation, the stuff that had been entered into the record legally was only what was in the rebuttal. And so what was in the rebuttal is in yellow on the chart. And then what's in red, what was in the rebuttal is in red. And then what's not is in yellow. And Howard, I'm so glad you're here.
Sorry I'm late, everyone.
So let me kind of frame up really quick. So Mark has been on the call.
I'd like to clarify a little bit what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should I do that?
Yeah, so just before you start, Howard, Mark was on the phone. He just jumped off. He gave us the background of what's happened. And then we kind of got to the point where the group is trying to understand what's left and what's happening with these.
Right.
So,
right.
Thanks.
So what's in red listed as rebuttal, that's what Excel has agreed to in an official filing they made in the docket, in their rebuttal testimony. So that hasn't been approved yet, but it's what Excel is offering to do as of now. But we go to the hearing and write a post-hearing brief, and we're still putting on the table everything else that we proposed in my testimony. So nothing is agreed to yet.
And what's in yellow is what would be the items that you're in testimony to get back in.
No, I mean, we can't talk about what was in the draft settlement agreement. That was confidential and for settlement discussion purposes only. We can't go forward and say, oh, in addition to the things in red, Excel agreed to do A, B, and C in the settlement discussions. We're not able to do that. That's not allowed.
But are you
what we're doing at the hearing and in our post-hearing brief called the statement of position is putting back into play everything I proposed in my testimony, whether it was in the settlement or not, Patricia.
That's how we're getting it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Howard, there's a chance the judge might accept things that Excel rejected outright.
Things that they didn't include in their rebuttal. Yes, there's a chance. It's probably a low chance because the judge has to think that we know better than Excel on these sort of gory details of the different programs. We'll make a run at it, but and at the hearing when I'm cross-examined, I can't just start talking. I'm not asked to just talk. I'm cross-examined. Excel said they might ask me some questions and the judge might ask me some questions, but they might not.
So the judge is likely to defer to Excel in a lot of cases, I would imagine.
Right.
As a perceived expert in the room type of thing. Yeah.
Right. Particularly on these issues. There are other issues. The settlement fell apart over other things, not our issues, right?
Yeah.
The settlement fell apart because there was big disputes over the budget cap, over the performance incentive for demand response, the relationship between this docket and the forthcoming clean heat plan, which is going to provide additional funding for beneficial electrification. So there was a lot of other issues that were not resolved in the settlement discussions, and for those reasons, you know, Excel could have said, all right, well, we'll just do a partial issue settlement on the things that we've agreed on with the EBC and others, all these program changes. But there was a bunch of other controversial stuff. And unfortunately, they just said, sorry, no settlement, rather than settlement on some of the issues only.
And that was one of the first strategies that you and Mark were working to get is, can we have all the interveners settle together like we normally do on the majority of everything, and then those items that were unsettled for those couple of other groups, they would continue and go litigate. But instead, Excel said we're going to litigate, and we all are going to litigation now. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's sort of what, I mean, they just kind of surprised us at they also delayed their original settlement proposal and their second round settlement proposal. They left us very little time. There was a deadline for submitting a settlement to the commission, and Excel unfortunately left very little time to try to resolve differences that were not getting worked out, and we were coming up on the deadline, and they basically just said they were thrown in the towel.
And that's why you guys were getting such short notices. Friday, they said, okay, this is due on Tuesday. So we sent you out an invite for Friday so we could have our action groups and get our information in on time. And just thank you to the action groups and all of you and your companies for jumping in so quickly, because it's been like Howard said, super tight schedule.
I want to point out one other thing. So we're going to do what we just said, right? I'll answer questions if I get questions during the hearing, which starts Monday morning. If I don't get questions, I don't get questions. Then we will have a deadline, maybe about 2 weeks after the hearing ends, to write our post-hearing brief. We will again present and defend everything that was in my testimony. Provide some additional background on who EBC is and the knowledge it has and the role it plays. And, you know, we'll leave it to the judge. Judge will then decide what she agrees with and what she doesn't. In our recommendations and everybody else's recommendations, the judge presents her recommended order to the commission reviews it, and the commission has to ultimately approve it. It's unlikely the commission is going to disagree with anything the judge recommends, but they could. That's a possibility. So there's a multi-step approval process. But once this is all over, maybe in about 2 or 3 months, the docket is closed. I think EEBC can request a meeting with the leadership of the DSM and beneficial electrification programs at Excel, Mark Schoenheider and the other leaders at Excel, and ask them and politely twist their arms to implement the things that they agreed to do in the draft settlement agreement that didn't get approved in this docket. So, for example, in the insulation and air sealing area, in their rebuttal position, they've agreed to increase the rebates on air sealing to $400 max and insulation $500 max. But they didn't agree to make the change in the insulation threshold for attic insulation to go to R24 from the current R15 to R24. Thanks, Patricia. You're good there. So
Okay.
that was something that was in the draft settlement agreement that they said, yes, we'll do this. We think it's a reasonable thing to do. But for whatever reason, they left it out of their rebuttal testimony. And so I think on those things, the increase in the incentive on lighting controls is another thing that they agreed to in the settlement, Scott Kelly, but didn't put in their rebuttal position. The increase to, yes, that's right. They didn't include that in their rebuttal. So all those things that they included, that they agreed to do in that draft settlement that they ultimately kiboshed, I think we can sit down with them in a meeting or a set of meetings and ask them to make those changes, to again explain why they're the right thing to do, how it's going to help them get more savings, get more economic benefits, get more participants, all of that. And they can make these changes on the fly, so to speak. They issue a 60-day notice and they can tweak the programs. They can change rebate levels. They can change qualification thresholds. We're not stuck for 3 or 4 years without getting these things done. Now, if they say no, they say no. You know, we're just pleading with them to do this thing that they had previously said they would be willing to do. But I think there's a good chance that they will agree to do these things outside of this formal docket process. So we're not totally lost on these things, should they not be approved in this docket.
Well, and so, for example, then Howard, the year that we spent a lot of time on, and they were going to, in that settlement agreement, they were going to implement early in June. That's probably, where's that at off the
In
table?
fact,
I was gonna
Patricia,
look
that
at-
is something they did say they would do in their rebuttal testimony.
They did. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Let me go.
That was included in the rebuttal testimony, implementing changes. Is it there somewhere in the list?
That's what I was wondering. Yeah. Let's look up here.
Maybe it just didn't. Keep going down.
I think it was at the
Implements adjusted rebates.
where you
ASAP.
oh, somebody
keep going.
let's mute your
Yeah, number 12.
little same.
Number 12 is, that's a mistake. They did put that in the rebuttal. I've reviewed the rebuttal this week. Their rebuttal position. The rebuttal is agrees to do.
Howard, Sean Mullins has a question.
Okay.
Appreciate that. So going back to the likelihood of success of whatever post hearing document that potentially gets submitted, it sounds to what I'm hearing from you, Howard, is the odds are greatly in favor of the version of the rebuttal that Excel submitted, which was I would say, in our view, incomplete. And, you know, I'm very curious to understand the reasoning behind that, which we may not be able to, you can tell me whether we'll be able to do that now or have to wait for the proceedings to conclude. But if in fact the situation is that more than likely what Excel submitted in the rebuttal is at the end of the day what's going to come out of this process, I guess what I'm asking is, how do we just, you know, at what point is the juice worth the squeeze in terms of how much we try to react and pivot now versus what I'm actually very much in favor of is what you mentioned afterwards. If we have the ability to go in there and talk to them one-on-one to get what we want through 60-day notices or even close to what we wanted, I feel like that potentially could be, number one, a better long-term strategy, maybe a less expensive strategy, depending on what other things are being considered. And again, I'm going back to the very early emails, Patricia, where
Yeah.
I felt there was this big, huge, massive scope of work that was coming our way to try to salvage something here. So what I'm trying to figure out is how much effort is worth us doing right this second, you know, versus
Yeah.
putting it in at the end of the proceedings.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
second that question. This is Sean. I'll second that question.
yeah. So first of all, let me just clarify one thing. What is likely to get adopted if the judge only goes with proposals that Excel has made on program design details, it's not just their rebuttal, it's also what they first proposed, right, in their original testimony. Like, you know, the change to EER levels, that was in their original testimony. In their rebuttal testimony, they accepted some of EEBC's recommendations, but we did get some of the things we were hoping to get in their original testimony. So that the commission, the judge, and then the commission will most likely approve everything they've proposed in both their original testimony and rebuttal testimony, just to clarify that. About like what, to your question about like what's the value of going forward here? First of all, more or less, EEBC has to play this out, right? The process is what it is now, and we can't just back out. I mean, we could. I mean, if Mark Detsky wrote to all the parties saying EEBC is out of money and neither he or Mr. Geller can appear at the hearing, people would laugh at us. We would lose all credibility. Everything we've proposed would be thrown out. My testimony becomes moot. And nobody pays any attention to it. So, I mean, I wouldn't do that. I without getting paid, and Mark, without getting paid, we would be there at the hearing participating. I have to, the company, Excel has said they have up to 20 minutes of questions for Mr. Geller. The judge may have questions for me. I want to, you know, I want to play ball. I want to maintain my credibility. And so does EEBC. So that we sort of have to do that. Now, I don't plan to attend the entire hearing, and I don't think Mark does either. We can get a sense for when I'm going to be questioned, if I'm going to be questioned, and be available and ready to, you know, we'll be logged into the Zoom. It's a virtual hearing, not in the hearing room. And just do that. And then the last step is writing this post-hearing brief. And we don't have to do that. We can just go with our testimony. We're not required to file that, but the commission and the judge, in my experience, they read the post-hearing briefs. That summarizes everybody's position. Even there's interveners that didn't file any testimony. They still write a post-hearing brief, and that's kind of the statement of their position. And that gets relied on a lot in the decision process. Decision makers may not read all the testimony, but they will read the post-hearing briefs, the statement of positions of the parties. I remember in DSM strategic issues, when the commission was deliberating hours and hours and hours of deliberation, they were talking about statement of position of what different parties said in their statement of position. So I think it would be a really bad idea not to do that.
Howard, a quick question.
And let me just say, I mean, I don't think it's a huge amount of work to do the minimal, what's necessary minimally to participate in the hearing and then write the statement of position. It's a lot of it's cut and paste from my testimony.
It's fair. I appreciate that. And I just to be clear, I wasn't trying to suggest you don't respond to the hearing request. I agree. You need to do that. I'm trying to make sure that I understand what our reasonably credible scope of work is versus maybe what I perceive from some previous communications on the larger process. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
And I also want to add too, there's two pieces where we're talking about, this scope of work. If we go into and start meeting with Excel afterwards and try to get through, what was an original settlement program, that's a big scope of work too. So, I mean, you're talking about either way, there's a cost to go through litigation, and then there's the cost.
Yeah, we would have to prepare for that meeting, and have that meeting or a couple of meetings. So I don't think it's huge, but it's some hours.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, if I'm involved,
but it's measured and it's planned and it's strategic versus reactionary. It's the reactionary part of this, and maybe an initial panic that I don't like being in that position to make decisions. So that I really try to slow this thing down and understand, what's really urgent versus what's important, and that's where my head is at right now.
Fair enough.
Hey, Howard, this is Greg. Do you think that June 1st date for the changes is still going to happen, or does this whole process have to play out before?
Yeah, I think if we had a settlement, that June 1st would have been, I mean, we're ready in May.
Right.
So I don't really know. I think they put that on, that's in their testimony. They may issue a 60-day notice. Now, would they issue the 60-day notice on June 1 with a later start date? My guess is that's probably not going to start June 1. The final decision from the commission, I mean, we're looking at probably certainly into July. So given that the docket isn't going to wrap up until this summer, I'm guessing that they won't be making the change effective June 1, but maybe later in the summer.
Gotcha, thank you.
And adding onto that timing front, first off, I assume all existing rebates will stay in place in perpetuity until, you know, this is settled. And I don't even know if this would be on the table, but like, could rebates be retroactive to June 1? You know, equipment or projects that are done that would qualify, but you know, that are done after June 1st, but in this in-between period. Again, I don't know how this process works, but if that's something we can ask for.
Yeah, if they put out a 60-day notice, just let's say that they would implement the ER change, just throwing out, you know, effective September 1. When they issue 60-day notice, there's 30 days for interested parties to respond. We could submit a response requesting that they make it retroactive.
Yeah, that's obviously would be nice, but
yeah,
there's a give and take
you know,
here.
I think after the hearing is next week. It's not going to be all week. It might be done Tuesday or Wednesday. I could call Mark Schoenheider and ask him, Mark, I just want to get some clarification about that issue of the June 1 start. What is XL planning to do, given that they've offered to make those changes effective June 1? That's in their official position. And next week will be, you know, middle of May 16th, May 17th. I could ask them what their plan is and let everybody know, and twist his arm a little to make that change as soon as possible and make it retroactive if it isn't finalized until, you know, 60 days after whenever it is they submit it via 60-day notice.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Howard.
Yeah.
Hey, Howard.
There's also an uncertainty in my mind, which I can ask Mark to clarify. Do they actually have to do a 60-day notice to make a change like that? Or could they just do it? You know, can they just say effective June 1? Could they say on May 17th, effective June 1, the EER requirement changes to such and such? EER 2 level for qualifying for a heat pump rebate. Can they just do that? Send their trade allies an email, change their website? Do they need a 60-day notice or not for something like that? That's a little unclear to me. Obviously, if they don't need to do a 60-day notice, that's easier and potentially quicker.
Hey, Howard.
Yeah.
Just a clarifying question there. I think from what I had seen on the HVAC side with the air source heat pumps, that they didn't agree to any EAR changes. It looks like they just agreed to like the 250 per ton cooling, 600 per ton. Would I be wrong in that, or was that just what I had saw?
Well, they've agreed to do what they proposed in their initial testimony. Okay. Remember, I did a summary of their initial position back in December 26th. I wrote a detailed memo and explained in that memo that for cold climate heat pump rebates, their proposed qualification levels are 15.2 SEER 2, 10.0 EAR 2, and 8.1 HSPF 2. And for non-cold climate, it was 15.2, 9.6 EAR 2, and 7.8 HSPF 2.
Is that right?
Right, and we requested they go down to 7.7. They never agreed to that. But that those original proposed changes in their initial filing are still their position. So
Gotcha.
they are proposing changes, and it's in their original proposal, not their rebuttal.
So is the original proposal on the left?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I think it's like looking at the chart here, it's the original proposal by Excel on the left, and I just have the air source heat pumps up in the cold climate. And then the middle is, you know, our response with our requests. And of course, the end is the combination of basically where all those are at in the process on the far right. It's a great discussion. Thank you, Howard. It's always helpful. Are there any more questions? Everyone, I think the key thing for the EBC is just budgeting wise, going into the litigation, and then if we do the meetings to follow, you know, we don't have budget for those anymore because we've gone through our budget for just the settlement process, the settlement agreement process. So I'd be asking if members would want to contribute to that. If you know, the thing that is the most helpful is going to any of your counterparts and asking them to join, you know, to be a part of this, to help us, you know, that brings additional funds in and additional support, which is really the strength of the EBC is the membership. You know, that's our currency. That's where the rubber meets the road. So I'd be asking, putting a call out for, you know, any companies, you know, to help support us pushing this over the line and then continuing into next year, or the rest of the year, I should say.
And how much are we short? Roughly?
Well, that's where
You sent an
we
email.
have some past, you know, and that we still owe, you know, so we're looking to raise at least 15,000.
I have a technician knocking on my door. Can I excuse myself?
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Howard.
Sorry
Yeah,
I was late.
no worries. We always
Okay.
appreciate it. Super
Bye-bye.
helpful. All right. Bye. Yeah. So we're really looking to raise enough money to do the work through the rest of the year because we've had the staff time as well as the legal team. And so when I say 15,000, like that typically just covers the legal. We also have the staff time. And so we don't have a budget for that going forward either. So, you know, we're looking to raise more than that so the EBC can be sustained to continue through the rest of the year. The other things that are coming too is, you know, EBC has been asked, literally, I got an email while we were on the call, to give feedback, start putting our groups of contractors, manufacturers, distributors, our supply chains together to give feedback to CO on stacking rebates, which we've been talking about for the last year. The CO is now ready to start getting feedback from us. So that's the other piece that, you know, this will continue in a couple different ways. We get Excel, we get the rebates sorted out there, and then start working on the stacking rebates for all the action groups. So that's part of our agenda for this year.
Tricia, can you perhaps send out maybe a request for the additional donations that you're looking for? And that way,
Yeah.
for those of us who are not at the level that we can do that, we can send that to our constituents on that side.
Absolutely. That's part of the reason we like to do this table of wins as well, because I think this is, you know, this is one of the pieces we give with you with the request, because this explains, you know, here at the beginning, it's not terribly long. It's like a paragraph of this is where we're at, you know, here's all the rebates that we submitted. And that's the 25 of 31 that were accepted. Now we're going into litigation due to disagreements. And here's what's up on the table, you know, here. So if we give you a request, just a, you know, couple paragraphs and this document. And we can also, when you say, yes, we want to do it, then we can provide a very specific invoice, you know, based on what your management says they would like to do. That would be fantastic. Does that fit what you would need, Todd?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. This is a powerful group, and it's, you know, that's one of our goals too, is to increase our membership so that the support's there. It's not just on the shoulders of a smaller group. You know, we're small but mighty. And you know, I think reputation wise, EBC is really looked to as the expert by the utilities, the cities and counties. Denver expressed that as well, that, you know, EBC, you guys are the experts, you know, on the contractor side of things. So all the work that you guys is recognized, and it's also you know, getting us a lot of invites to go speak on panels on behalf of, you know, what you guys are doing and what the EBC is doing. So it's great to see in where the organization has grown too. So with that, I know we're over time, 7 minutes here. Any other questions, any other comments? Everyone, thank you so much for getting into the meeting, and we appreciate you calling and getting to get in. So anything else?
Thank
Was
you.
it?
Will you
Yeah.
send an update after the court hearing?
Yes, we'll probably send out we will definitely, I don't know how many, we might send out, you know, a couple, maybe short ones. Just saying, here's what happened, you know, wrapped up the litigation next week, the hearing, here's what's next. And then we'll, you know, like you're saying, if we can even just send you a paragraph in an email or something simple and not a formal email, that would really like to do that. The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Can you
Anything
also send out the Word document we were looking at?
Yeah, and this is a draft, but yeah, we'll send out to everybody who's on the call, and actually to the whole membership, because remember, this document is this is confidential, it's proprietary, it is legally required that it can't be shared outside of any of the interveners group. So this is a members only document, just to remind everyone. But yes, we'll send it out after the call here.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great. Anything else? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia.